Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So we're very happy to have Muriel Niederle from Stanford University here. So Muriel did her PhD at Harvard together with Al, and she has two she does tons of work. She has done stuff on auctions, on K-level thinking. She's an experimental economist. But there's sort of two main focus points. One is gender, how gender matters for economic outcomes. And the other one is...
Like looking in this room.
That's actually very related. And the other one is market design. And in gender, Muriel has one of the most cited papers in the last 10 years in economics. And it's about showing that women and men differ in their taste for competition. And it's a very readable, readable paper. And it's in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, 2007, I think. And it's actually a great paper. So you should.
Thank you, Christian.
It's even if you're not an economist, it's easy to read, and it's a beautiful experiment. And this is very much related in this line of work.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Interesting.
Well, thank you very much.
I'm going to enjoy this.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm going to talk about gender competitiveness and career choices. And I will give you an overview over my work on gender. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the old paper, and I'm going to talk about how this relates to newer work that we have done. And the starting point is, as you say, you just look in this room, there's still large gender differences in economic success. There's this glass ceiling effect. There's a huge gender wage gap in the US and in many countries. And one thing that seems to be important...
Are you making comments about my salary? They're making comments about my salary. It might have been even higher if I were a woman.
By the way, we have the econ convention. So
oh yeah, please interrupt me. Yes. I'm happy to take questions. You can also compete for questions, but I'm happy to take questions. So it turns out that for a big chunk of the gender gap in economic success is driven by the fact that there are large gender differences in education. It's not that women get less education, they get just different kinds of education. So in the US, for example, it is recently true that boys and girls are as likely to take math classes and science classes in school. But if you look at extremely high achieving math students, girls are still highly underrepresented. And this paper, one option might be that maybe girls are just, more stupid, just not able in math. I'm also not very politically correct, so if somebody cares about this, I apologize. So it might be that girls are just not as able in math. And there's a nice paper by Edison and Swanson that looks at where do children come from that are going to go to these American math competitions. Okay, so that's like the American version of the math Olympiads. And what they find is that when you look at boys come, by and large from all over the US. You're going to get a very talented boy popping up, in the middle of nowhere from time to time. When you look at girls, basically all the girls that go to these American math competitions come from a small group of schools. Okay, so this suggests that we're not going to pick up the best girls. We just have a combination of good girls plus, they have to be in an environment where they get pushed to do this. In Europe, the situation is a bit worse. In schools, when children have a choice whether to take more less math-intensive classes, girls are much less likely to take math-intensive classes.
There are some countries in Europe where I recall, at least when I started visiting Switzerland, girls were given less. It wasn't only that they had an option. Girls took knitting and boys took, I swear, an extra hour or two of math a week as like 10-year-olds. And then these idiots would say that boys were better at math. I mean, it was just horrifying. So, no, I'm not sure if that's still true.
So Switzerland is a bit special. I mean, they also were one of the countries that had, at least OECD countries where women, at least in some parts, could not vote for a very long time. But, even in countries which we think of as maybe more egalitarian, like the Netherlands, I'm going to show you, just girls are just much less likely to take math-heavy classes. In the college level, it's true in Europe, but also in the US, girls are much less likely to graduate from a so-called STEM major, science, technology, engineering, or math. And there's some evidence that this is not driven by just ability, but is driven by other things. So one question you might have is, why do we care about math and in general science and technology? Well, one reason is that how good you are in math is a very good predictor of how much money or how successful you're going to be later. We could talk about literature, but it turns out it's not that economically rewarding to be very good in literature. So that's why we're going to focus on math. So there are lots of explanations why we observe these gender differences. One set of explanation is discrimination. So that would be your example in Switzerland. If you're not going to teach them math, then they're not going to be as good in math. That's kind of easy, or we don't even accept them. There could be differences in abilities. And here this paper by Hessel and Swanson is a nice example. There's a very clean example of showing this. This might not be everything that's going on. It could also be differences in preferences. Maybe women don't want to take math-intensive classes, or don't want to go to engineering schools because they also worry about the jobs later on. But it suggests that it's there's some evidence that it's not just driven by preferences. Then there's a huge psychology literature on gender differences in non-cognitive skills. The question is, are these differences robust, and can they help account for these outcomes?
So what's a non-cognitive skill?
Perfect. Altruism. Okay, there's a non-cognitive skill. And there's some evidence that women might be more altruistic than men, but it's not completely obvious how this would relate to math choices. More interestingly, there's also large literature on gender differences in risk aversion. Okay? So it could be that this gender difference in risk aversion can explain why we go to different jobs. There is some evidence by Doman and Falk that shows that people that are more risk averse are more likely to hold government jobs. Okay, this is in Germany, where the government sector is very big. Now the problem of a lot of
safe. It's safer than it is here.
Oh, yeah, that's also true. Yes. Now the problem is this evidence is very correlational. Okay, so it could be that because you hold a safe government job, you become more risk averse. So we have no idea which direction this goes. Okay. As Marco said, I kind of started introducing another concept that was kind of more known in psychology, but I started to introduce this in economics. This is gender differences in competitiveness. And when you look at the laboratory literature, it's actually the easiest and almost the most robust and biggest gender difference you can find in the lab, this gender difference in competitiveness. So what I'm going to tell you in this talk is I'm going to show you how we can establish these gender differences in competitiveness in the lab. I'm going to show you that this is robust. And then we're going to want to find out whether, it's just a kind of a cool behavioral gender difference that we find, or can this actually help us understand some of the differences in the labor market. Okay, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about what else we might want to do. So gender difference in competitiveness, something, I didn't invent this. Development psychologists have talked about this for a long time. Basically, boys are found to spend more time at competitive games, while girls often play games. There's no clear endpoint like house or family. Men also describe themselves as more competitive than women. But this is just, the question is, what is this really driving in terms of economic outcomes? The advantage, so what we're going to do is we're going to run experiments. And the advantage is that we can show that we don't have to worry about self-selection issues. So it could be that one reason women might not be that competitive is because they want to raise children and have time for family. Our lab experiment is going to last an hour. It's not going to be a problem if you want to start a family. Another issue might be that maybe girls don't like competitive games because they're going to run with boys and boys are faster, so that kind of makes it less interesting. The advantage, again, of our lab is that we're going to be able to measure performance. So we can ask whether a boy and a girl, or man and a woman of the same performance are going to be more or less competitive. The other advantage is we can rule out discrimination. Maybe if you've got kids again, girls would feel weird to play with boys, or maybe the boys don't want to have the girl around, or as I said, career concerns or time commitment. Okay? So the advantage of the lab is it's going to be very easy for us to have a level playing field, where we can exclude a lot of other things and then check whether even in this level playing field are we going to find gender differences in competitiveness.
You can also control who leaves, right?
Right. So we can control a lot of things that might drive gender differences in competitiveness. I'm going to come to this. Okay. So this is actually my second paper on gender differences in competitiveness that Marcus talked about. It's joint work with Lisa Wesselund, and it's a very simple experiment. So let me tell you about it. We took 80 students from the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon universities. The students would come to the lab, and they would be in a group of 2 men and 2 women. They're going to perform a real task several times under different compensation schemes. They're not going to hear or learn anything about the performance of others until the experiment is over, and we never mention gender. Okay? So the way we're going to do it is we're going to tell people, this is your group. We're going to put them in groups of 4. This is your group, but we're not going to say, by the way, these are 2 men and 2 women. Okay? But you can see each other. What we want to observe is who is going to select into a competitive environment. So in order to do that, ideally, we want a task where men and women are almost equally good. So there's not going to be, a big gender difference in performance, because otherwise, we're not going to have a big overlap to talk about gender differences in choices. And here's a task we chose. People have to add up 5 two-digit numbers for 5 minutes. Okay? So the performance is how many correct answers you're going to have. You're not going to get penalized for wrong answers, but people are not going to count either. On the one hand, this is a math task. So people said, oh, how come boys are not better at this? On the other hand, this is a very easy math task. So I think, you talk to many mathematicians, they were not always the best in doing things like that. But the other thing is that this is something, when children learn adding up two-digit numbers, girls are actually often better than boys in school. Okay, so it's not obvious that this gender difference in math holds for very easy math tasks. Okay, if anything, it's actually not true.
Can you just clarify, so groups of 4 people and no one participant knows about the other 3?
So the way we're going to do this is, you're going to come to the lab, and we're going to see, you're going to be in a group of 4 people. This is your group. And it turns out every group has 2 men and 2 women. But we're not going to say, by the way.
And they're doing this together? Or?
Okay, so here's how we're going to do it. The first task they do is, they have to solve this problem for 5 minutes. And we're going to say, we're going to do this several times, and one of those times is going to count for real. Okay? Suppose the first one is going to count for real. We're going to determine this at the very end. If the first one is going to count for real, then everybody is going to get 50 cents for every correctly solved problem.
So and everyone, but it's in the groups, or
no?
So
okay. So
no groups.
You're going to go to the lab,
okay.
And for this one, you actually don't care about the group. Just going to say, the first time you're going to perform this task, if we pick this first performance for payment, what's going to happen is you're going to get 50 cents for every correct answer. Okay? Once this task is over, you actually don't know if this is the one we're going to pay or not. You're going to know how many you solved correctly, and you're not going to learn anything about what anybody else did. Once this first task is over, we're going to say, okay, now you're going to do it again, the same task. You're going to add up 5 digit numbers for 5 minutes. But now we're going to change how we can pay you. The second round is used for payment, then this is how you're going to get paid. We're going to have groups of 4 people, which turns out to be 2 men and 2 women. But remember, we don't mention gender. And we're going to say the person who's going to solve the most problems, that person is going to get $2 per correct problem, and everybody else is going to get nothing. Okay?
So it's like a winner take all.
It's a winner take all. Yeah. But the price is dependent on how many you solve. So in that sense, it's a little bit different.
God.
Right? So we're going to get 4 times as much.
As I think it's going to happen, that's outrageous.
Well, so far we don't have any choice. So we just have performance.
I know. I'm just anticipating.
Okay. Once you're done with this task, again, you're not going to get any feedback. You're not going to learn if you won the tournament or not. You just learn this is how many you did. That's it. Okay. So you're not going to learn who did how what or whether you won the tournament. Okay. So let me just tell you a little bit about the performance of the men and women in our sample. Remember, we have 40 men and 40 women. The average performance of women in the piece rate is 10.2, of men is 10.7. This difference is not significant. In the tournament, everybody gets a little bit better. This is actually mostly driven by the fact that you do it again. So people learn not to use pencil and paper, which they have, because that just slows you down. People do about 12 correct problems. Then I can also show you, depending on the performance, what is the chance that you're going to be actually the highest in your group. Okay? So it turns out, if you have a performance of 12, it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman, you have a 13.4% chance to be the highest person in your group. If you have a performance of 13, you basically have bit more than a quarter chance of being the highest in your group. If you have a higher performance, you have a 50% or more chance to be the highest performer in your group. Remember, the tournament, you're going to get a payment that is 4 times as large as in the piece rate. So in principle, if you are somebody who solves 14, then you would make strictly more money from the tournament. In expectation, if you solve 13, it kind of doesn't matter. If you solve less, you're going to make more money from the piece rate. Okay? Yeah.
So that's per minute. You solve 10 questions.
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
10 questions.
Yeah, correctly. Now the fastest person.
Maybe you have a competition. Do 20.
So it turns out the best person here was like 22 or something. But then we did it again in Harvard, and then it was like 35. So in the Boston area, we had some people who are kind of a bit off the charts. But there's a huge distribution of how much people can see.
Why is there a gap for the males at 18?
There was no
We
male
didn't
who
have
did
a man
18.
who did 18. So we can calculate this gentleman.
How many samples did you have?
40 men and 40 women for 0.
One question. So I'm a little bit confused. The men are doing better than women.
Yeah, but it's not significant. So this is true, but it's like almost nothing.
No, that is not the point.
Yeah, sure.
But it's good to point it out, okay? Sorry, go ahead.
So I haven't asked my question yet. So it's not reflected somehow in these conditional probabilities. So if the men are doing slightly better than women, then a woman conditioned on her performance, because she's competing with 2 men and 1 woman, she should do a little bit worse.
This is why these numbers are not exactly equal. But you can see the difference is like almost nothing.
But that
It
gap
really
is
is not.
This gap is driven by the fact that men are a little bit better than women. So if I'm a woman, I have a somewhat tougher competition. That's why I show you this row, but it shows you that basically the difference is so small.
Yeah.
Is the difference driven by extreme men or women, or?
No, it's just it's a little bit shifted to the right. It's just a bit better. So here comes the interesting, the relevant question. Now we let them choose. What incentive scheme do you want for your third and last performance? So if I choose piece rate for my third performance, it's easy. I'm going to get 50 cents for every correctly solved problem. The question is, what's going to happen if I choose tournament? So what we're going to do is, if I choose tournament for my third time I'm going to perform this task, what's going to happen is that my new performance is going to be compared to the old performance of the people in my group. Okay, remember we all just did a tournament. So if I'm going to choose tournament for task 3, I'm going to take the tournament performance of everybody else from task 2, and I'm going to compare my new one to everybody old one, not including mine. If mine is the highest, my new one, then I'm going to win, and otherwise I lose.
Do I know the performance?
No, you get no feedback. So after you did the tournament, you just know how many you did, and that's it. You don't even know if you won the tournament.
But you have to do better in particular than yourself?
No,
it's the average.
excluding yourself.
No,
the other
no,
people in the
excluding
group.
yourself.
Excluding, I heard
Excluding,
Excluding
no,
yourself.
excluding
So,
yourself.
I come from a country where we do a lot of downhill skiing. So this is like, we all ski down the hill. And now I can decide if I'm going to be in a competition, the old times are given from the other people. I can ski again, and my new time is going to count compared to the old time of the other people.
But so you know how everyone else on the team did?
No, you have no
So
idea.
you have like no information about doing the
You
competition.
have no information.
You don't know how good they were. You don't know how you did relative to them.
That's exactly right.
You have zero information.
Zero information.
Okay.
So when you
How
say
many
you had zero
you solved?
information, you didn't see the other people's pencils moving? Like were you in the
No,
room with
because
them?
you basically have this divider, so it's very hard to see.
Do you know how many you solved?
Yes, you know how many you solve
Do you
correctly.
know if you won or not?
No, you don't know if you know nothing.
No information about your
Did
competitors.
you also, did you ask these people what they think their chance of winning
Perfect.
the tournament is?
So I'm going to show you. So one reason you might think that you choose different, that I'm more likely or somebody else is more likely to choose tournament than me is that we have a different performance. So that we can control here. The other reason might be that I just think I'm going to be better.
Yeah.
So we're going to ask them for their beliefs, and so that's going to be a control later. Risk aversion might be another one.
Yeah,
So I'm going to also have control for risk
There's
aversion.
another one.
So we have a lot of other controls. I'm going to show you the one in beliefs in
So
detail.
you're going to correct for
But
risk
not-
aversion, because I wasn't
Yes.
seeing
Yes.
how you.
Not yet, but it's going to
Okay,
happen.
yeah, I was thinking,
Yeah.
I couldn't tell the difference.
I'm gonna be a bit
Okay.
fast on this, however, because I want to go to the second one, but I can tell you how to do it. Okay.
So So is there a reason why we interrupt the women speakers so much more than the men?
That you can only answer yourself.
No, I can answer him.
So what do we find? So it turns out, who would in principle make more money from the tournament? Well, all of these people who did 14 or more, right? If my new performance is at least as good as my old one, then if I have a performance of 14, I should enter. If I have a performance of 12, I should not enter.
But you don't know that.
No, you don't know that, but I know that, ex post. And if you have a performance of 13, you're basically indifferent. Okay, so what would we predict? If you think, if you think about, now in so economics is a bit funny. In economics, you often assume that you know everything, even though you don't. So we're going to try to control for this a little bit, but this is going to be my first approach. Okay, so what we would predict is that basically a third of the men and a third of the women should enter. If we add the people who are indifferent, we would predict 40% of women and 45% of men entering. What we actually find is 35% of women and 73% of men entering. Okay? So this is a huge difference. It's nice, as I said, this is one of the biggest, it's very easy to generate this difference and it's very robust. You don't need a lot of econometrics to show that this is significant. So let me show you a little bit on who is entering as a function of how good they are. Okay?
So the people are making decisions, they don't have to coordinate, the group doesn't have to agree.
No. So the nice thing is, the reason we choose it this way is that when you decide to enter the tournament, I actually couldn't care less about your decision if you are in my group. Okay, so I actually don't have to think about your decision because I just have to beat your old performance. So the advantage is that I don't have to, this is something I can't measure. I can't measure your beliefs about what the other person will do. So the advantage is here is that it doesn't matter what the other person does. So I don't even have to measure those beliefs. That's exactly why we do it this way. So one issue you might think that this takes away some of this elbow competition aspect. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, it's always a little bit milder than another competition would be. Right. Given that we still find big differences, that's okay. But this is exactly why we chose to do it this way. Mm-hmm.
But they don't know if other people in the group have entered the competition.
Yeah, but see, you don't care.
But it doesn't matter because it's based.
But you also don't know.
But it's a signal.
But you
have no idea because you make the decision at the same time and you don't get any feedback.
It's a signal if it's correlated with skill. If bravado or whatever is correlated with skill, then it's a signal.
But you make the decision at the same time and you never observe anyway what other people are doing.
But unless you happen to know how well people do on this test, you have no objective metric of your
That's exactly right. So one thing that might drive this difference is differences in beliefs. So I'm going to address this.
Efficacy is the obvious thing that I would think about.
Yeah. 2 more slides, and then we're going to show it to you. Okay, so who is entering as a function of their performance? So these are the best 25% people. It turns out that only about 40% of women enter, and almost 80% of men. And even if you look at the bottom 25% of people, these people have no chance of winning. Okay, these people basically win for sure. And here, some should enter and some should not.
And there are your CEOs. Those blue ones above 80 are your CEOs.
Even the worst group of men is more likely to enter than the best group of women. Okay, so it's just basically all over the place. So the question is, this decision is driven by beliefs on relative performance. They just know the absolute performance. So maybe this is driven by gender differences in beliefs. Okay? So what we did is, after they did everything, they made all these choices, we asked them, remember the past 2 tournaments? What do you think was your rank? You think you were first, second, third, or fourth? Okay? And if you're going to guess your rank correctly, we're going to pay you $1, and otherwise you're going to get nothing. So for economists, we want to incentivize this question, so we do it this way. Okay, so there are 2 things we can look at. One, are there gender differences in beliefs? And then the second question is, well, are they going to drive this difference in choices?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me tell you about gender differences in beliefs. It turns out 30 of our 40 men think they're the best in the group. Most of them are wrong. Most by definition.
Wait. Shouldn't 29 be wrong?
No, I mean some of them.
No,
are
different groups. Different groups. Yeah, groups of
10 groups of 4.
Okay.
Also, when there are ties, we allow for first and second to be correct. But when you look at those numbers, so what turns out, men have more optimistic beliefs than women. Both are somewhat over-optimistic, right? Even the women, they're much more likely to think they're first than they're last. So we find that both of them are optimistic about their beliefs, but men are significantly more so than women. Okay, so condition on their performance, which means conditioning what they should have said to maximize the chance of getting $1, men are much more likely to say a low number, so to say that they're very good, than women are.
What if I'm risk averse, so I'm just going to hedge against my performance, and guess I'm second.
And then you're going to enter the tournament or not?
I mean, either I get $1 from the second question, or I get money because I finished first in the tournament.
You're smarter than most of them.
What you could have done is you could have said that you're last. Okay? You could also not correlate it with a choice of entering the tournament. That would be one way of hedging, right? That you actually think you're first, but then you're going to say, well, I don't think I'm first, so that if I'm going to lose the tournament, at least I'm going to get money there. So this would suggest that I would get a negative correlation between the beliefs and the chance of entering the tournament.
So could it be that these aren't actually the beliefs, their beliefs about their rank that you're eliciting, but something about their self-image, that they're not happy to report that they actually think that they're number 4, and so they kind of delude themselves into thinking they're better, and there could be gender differences in
maybe they think 4 is the best. Maybe they just.
So we actually say best, second, third, and first. But that, pink questions are not that stupid. But
beliefs can be tied up with self-image in this way.
Very good question. So it turns out, so I think it's in general an interesting question. It's how people form beliefs, especially when it's about their own performance. Luckily, Marcus and I just basically resubmit tomorrow. We're going to resubmit the paper, which is exactly the question we're looking at. And it turns out that people are definitely very biased when it's about something they care about. And in that paper, we also find that so here beliefs are somewhat weak. Okay, we can just ask about the ranking. In the paper with Marcos, we have much more precise beliefs, and then we can actually show that women are very different than men in forming beliefs initially, but also in updating beliefs. Okay? So you might even worry that in the long run, it may take a really long time until they would converge with their beliefs.
Can you explain what optimal was over here?
Yeah, condition your performance, I can calculate what you should have said in order to maximize your earnings. And this is what you should have said. Well, you don't see it here, but I can regress what you did say on what you should have said, and then add a gender dummy in there. Okay. Now, one thing to note is, remember, we had 73% of men entering the tournament and 35% of women. 75% of men think they're the best in the group, and 40% of women think they're the best in the group. Okay, so maybe that's all that's going on. Okay, so it could be that this whole gender difference in competition is actually driven by gender difference in beliefs, which would be fine. I mean, that's okay. So we can ask whether this is the case. So the way to look at this is I'm going to show you for each belief what's the chance of entering the tournament, and then we're going to have regressions where we add this. But let me show you the figure first. So here, so can this overconfidence account for the gender gap in tournament entry? So I'm going to show you for each belief what's the chance that men and women enter the tournament. So among the people who thought they were the best in their group, only about half the women enter the tournament, compared to more than 80% of the men. Among the people who thought they're second in their group, we had still about 25% of women entering the tournament.
So that's risk aversion as opposed to belief, or how would you?
It could also be competitive attitudes.
No, but I mean, if I think I'm like 80% likely, interpret this as there's one guy who thinks he's 80% likely to be the best, and one girl who thinks she's 50% likely to be the best. So if I think I'm 80% likely, then somehow my error bars are going to be much smaller, right?
Yes.
Whereas if I think I'm 50% likely, then the error bars are much larger, right? And this.
So this is, as I said, this is a somewhat weak measure of beliefs because we just asked for categories. So in the paper with Marcos, we have much nicer measure of beliefs. We also have more subjects, well, first of all, when we ran this, we didn't exactly know how to ask for beliefs in an intelligent way, as actually everybody who does economic experiments. But it turns out there's actually a very nice way to ask for beliefs when you have categorical variables. You can actually do that, and then you can get very precise estimates. So we didn't do that here. It was much simpler. That's why we opted for this one. We're going to have the control, which I'm not going to show you much about, on risk aversion. It's going to have another control on how you act on these suggested beliefs. But so far, that's the best I can do.
So how
given your if I'm the best, I should enter with 100%, right?
Yeah. If
Or
you're
should
second, 100%.
Well, unless I say I believe I'm the best, but I have a certain, I mean,
Well, that's
the
what he's
variance
asking,
plays a role.
uncertain.
What I can definitely say is that if you're in the top 25%, you should enter for sure. If you're in the second 25%, you should not enter for sure.
But you know,
some people may not.
No, but they don't.
But they don't know this.
No, they don't know that. I'm just telling you, this is what should happen. Okay? So, if people are in the third or the fourth quarter, they basically have no chance of winning the tournament. Okay, so these guys should not enter. These guys should enter, and in this group, the better ones should enter, the worst ones should not.
But Mira, I mean, this graph you just showed, I mean, the surprising thing is also, not this one, the one before, is like, you know, that for women, and also for men,
also
but
for
women, it's really like a flat graph. Right? I mean, you have almost no self-knowledge about your ability, right? Which is really kind of surprising.
Right.
So when we control for, well, let me show you the regressions. When we control for beliefs in addition to the performance.
How much money do you make in round 3?
Well, it depends on what you
depends
choose.
whether
Right?
you do
If you choose
50
piece rate, you get
cents
50%.
or
So the
No, but what's at
$2.
stake?
perfect.
150.
Here we go. If your performance is 18, say, and you do piece rate, you're going to get $9. If you choose tournament, you don't have a chance of one of winning, but almost, then you're going to get twice 18, $36. And so that's a huge difference. So when you think of it as just in terms of, even for people who have performance of 11 or 13, in terms of risk aversion, you would need ridiculously big gender difference in risk aversion, much bigger than you would ever find in the lab study where you.
No, it's not just risk aversion. I was worried. I might say, I just don't like the stupid competitions. For $2, I don't do it. On the other hand, if I sort of make $100, I might say, well, maybe I should.
It's $2 per problem, right? So if you solve 20, you're going to win for sure. You're going to get $40 compared to $10 in 5 minutes.
Trust them that they have figured out an amount of money that means something to.
So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So it
It's a big
doesn't.
difference.
You can't explain it by people just not liking competition, because the monetary. I mean, for students, $40 in 5 minutes is a lot of money.
It's a lot.
It's a very good slide.
No, it might seem, yeah, for undergraduates. So we have not run it with much higher stakes, but you know, some of this question goes back to the question is how much can I rely on this telling me something that is going to be correct outside of the lab, which is exactly the point of my second paper.
Okay.
But I agree with you. I mean, it turns out if you run most experiments, if you run them with smaller or larger stakes, the way you run larger stakes is you go to poorer countries. So that's easy. It's very hard to get NSF money to run large stakes in the US. But it's very easy to run large stakes in poor countries. It's very difficult to get changes in behavior unless it's something on fairness or altruism. But if it's kind of more behavior that depends on, most people look at playing different games, okay, which are not just driven by altruism questions. It's very difficult to get big changes in results. But I don't know anybody who did this with large stakes. So here's the comment. Okay. So when you add gender differences in beliefs, so when you add the gap strength, you're going to reduce the gender gap, but you don't eliminate it. You basically reduce it by about a third. And then we have a last task where we're going to try to study risk aversion and feedback aversion. Maybe I don't choose tournament because I don't want to find out I'm not the best person. Okay, so what we do is we basically tell people, remember your task 1 piece rate performance. I'm going to pay you once more for this task 1. And you can decide how to get paid for it, either by piece rate or by submitting this to a tournament. Okay? So now, in terms of risk aversion, you have exactly the same question as you had when you entered the tournament, but you don't have to perform anymore. That's the only difference. How much do I trust my beliefs? It's the same thing. Okay? We're going to measure beliefs in the piece rate, and then we're going to check, do you submit the piece rate to a tournament or not? Okay? It turns out when you do this, so I don't have it here, but when you do this submitting the first piece rate performance to a tournament or not, there are basically no gender differences once you control for performance and beliefs.
I see.
And you can use this decision as a control, and it takes away some of that coefficient on the gender gap in tournament entry. Some of it is driven by, because it's just another measure of beliefs and how you trust your beliefs. But there's still a lot of it left.
So it's not, so what you're concluding is that there is no gap in risk aversion, but there is a gap in belief in your abilities and in competitive instinct conditioned on your belief and abilities.
So we think from this paper we conclude these are the most important trait. Risk aversion, there seems to be something that just doesn't explain that much. So in the submit the piece rate, which I don't have here, it cannot really account for much. Now, you always worry. So this is the first experiment we did on choices of competitive or non-competitive incentive schemes. So there's a lot we can learn from this, but in the end it's 80 people and a specific way for us of running it. So you want to see replications of this. But I'm going to move on to the next study. So if there's some more questions, now would be a good time to ask. Yes.
Sorry. This is a frame of mind which I probably have, and it might explain this. So if there's a task that I think I should be good at, maybe I'm good, maybe I'm not, but I think I should, if I think I'm meant to be good at it, then I think I should be entering competitions. I'm not the best, whatever, but if I'm meant to be good at it, damn it, I'm going to compete, and if I lose, that's my fault. And this is sort of what's going on here. Like,
that's called competitiveness.
No, it's not. So my claim is if you had done
competition,
if you had done some some literature or something, or a cooking something, then maybe the women would all say, yes, I want to enter this pie baking contest because I believe that I'm supposed to be good at this.
I can think of something else to do with a pie, Grant.
So the reason, one reason.
This is a self-consistent.
No, it's a good question. I'm not, I guess we make fun of you, but it's still a good question. So, it turns out, so I personally have not run this, but a lot of people, the reason, this gender stuff became so known in economics is that a lot of people replicated this and really did. So first of all, this result is robust. Second, people looked at kind of more stereotypical female tasks. And then the papers are basically divided in two. There are some papers that find that nothing changes, and there are some papers that find that the gender gap is reduced. And we don't really know why some tasks work and others don't.
But it's not
completely wiped out.
It never flips.
So his theory doesn't work.
No, it doesn't flip.
Or maybe it's part of it, but not all of it.
Okay. The gap is also attenuated when I give people feedback about how good they are. Okay, so these beliefs seem to be really important. Okay.
Well, but then you have knowledge about how you did it, right?
Well, the question is in general, how often do you have knowledge about how good you are when you start something new?
But that's actually a key piece of development self-efficacy, is actually having master experiences and actually getting that feedback. And that seems to be a key component of why there are differences.
Right, but it's easy to give feedback about, so there are a lot of, here's another, a lot of people say, okay, I'm going to give you a test that's going to help me understand how good you are in certain things. Right. Now, there are two ways of giving that test. One is to say it's just a standard test. The other one is to say this test is going to tell me how good you are in math. Okay? So if this test is diagnostic, and it's diagnostic, then what happens is that people who suffer from a stereotype actually perform worse. Okay, so there's a huge literature of psychology that says that
stereotype threat.
Yeah. Stereotype threat, exactly. Yeah. So here, so I think it's going to be very hard. In the lab, here we can give feedback. It's very easy.
Right.
Because
you have no way of knowing whether or not you're actually bringing stereotype threat into play because you have no idea whether it's being perceived as diagnostic or formative.
And this task, one advantage of this task is that this task basically does not respond to incentives. So, your performance doesn't change a lot. Once you're going to go to kind of different performances, so you have another paper. My first paper on gender differences in competition was actually on a task where there is change in performance depending on the incentive scheme. And then we see that women underperform compared to men in a tournament, but not in a piece rate. But this was a task not in a piece rate. Okay. So this was a task where the whole performance of most people changes when you change incentive schemes. Here we picked a task where the performance is it's like if I ask you to sprint for like 5 meters or whatever, 15 feet, let's say. You're not going to get a big change in performance. So we picked that task because that was an advantage here. But when you think about feedback outside of the lab, that's something that you have to think about.
So in this experiment, at the very end, did you tell them if they won or not, or you never, or you just gave them the final payment?
Well, depending on the round, you could have deduced whether you won or not, because some people made 0. If we paid a tournament, if you paid task 2.
Because there are two things, right? On the one hand, it's like, I could just kind of, if it's competition, I could just dislike competing, but also I could dislike the feedback I'm getting, right? That I'm revealed to be the worst or the best guy, right?
Now the nice thing is when we do submit the piece rate, that also enters. And so that's why we have this decision of submitting the piece rate as a control.
But I don't understand it, because the aversion and feedback should have a little bit to do with how much you get paid.
Well, not necessarily. Some people.
No, but it could be like,
it's very easy to get people to buy.
It could be somehow that I'm getting paid for many things, and in the end, the total payment doesn't reveal how much I did in a particular task.
Right.
And so I don't get much feedback. I still might dislike competition. It's not. I've never learned I've never really learned my rank. But I just don't like competing because I kind of.
I don't want to
compete. I just kind of
makes you uncomfortable.
Makes me uncomfortable.
I don't want to know that I'm not the best in the 4 people.
Right.
So the thing is that in this last treatment, which I didn't show you in detail, this would also play a role, and we don't find it playing a role in this last treatment. So I don't think it's a big effect. But in our experiment, we designed this such that you never learn. Right. So here, this is not the case. Yeah.
Could you please repeat the point about submitting the piece rate and what you found?
Okay. So think of, so I don't have a slide on this, but here is choosing the tournament or not. Okay? Perfect. So remember, everybody did a piece rate performance. So the task 4 is the following. We're going to say, now instead of having to perform once more, we're going to take your old piece rate performance. So it has nothing to do with tournaments, and you can decide how to get paid for it. Either piece rate or tournament. If you choose tournament, we're going to look at your piece rate performance from the first task and compare it to the other people's piece rate performance from the first task. So once more, you don't care about the choices of others, but if you worry about getting feedback, you're going to get feedback. If you're worried about risk aversion, well, if you're best or not.
What if I told you? So it's a little dumb, because if I tell you were the best last time, do you want to enter a competition against last time? You have to be really stupid not to enter, but it's still...
This is reduced when people get feedback. So this gender difference gets reduced when you give people feedback on how good they are.
But didn't you say...
It's a feedback...
No, relative.
She also said something else. She said it takes a long time to close that gap.
So I'm asking what happens if you do absolute feedback.
In our case...
the best. Will you take it or not?
Oh, okay, I think of that as not absolute feedback. That's already relative, because it's relative to the other people in your group. So this feedback, people have played around with telling you you're the best in your group, or giving you the whole performance of everybody in this experiment. So all of those going to reduce the gender gap.
But if I tell you are the best in the group, and now I tell you compete against the past performance in the group.
Yeah, then the gender gap gets very small.
Yeah,
I don't know whether it disappears or not.
And are people rational now? Do they? Because then essentially, if I'm the first, I should take it, and if I'm third or fourth, I never should.
So here's another reason you might not take it, is that who knows how diagnostic your old performance is of your new performance, right? So there are lots of other reasons why you might not want to take it completely. But what turns out is that if I give people feedback, the gender gap is reduced. Okay, so there are quite a few people showing that.
What happens if we control for height?
We don't have height, so it's a good question, but I have no idea. So actually, somebody else was asking this question. He was a very short man. You care about height? You should height. I don't care about height.
I want to make sure I'm understanding this properly, but this is what I understand, so tell me if this is not correct. One, that much of the difference between competitiveness under the circumstances you described are related to confidence. Right?
Yeah, about a third of
right?
it.
So it's mostly about confidence.
Well, a third.
Which I've been calling self-efficacy, which is a little bit more focused, but still. And then the second thing is, when you give everyone more information, women are more likely to be in the tournament than when they have basically zero information.
The gender gap disappears for both reasons, because women enter more, but men also enter less. Because we have a lot of men who enter, some men, there are two groups of people who are going to lose a lot of money here.
So I feel like I'm having a hard time thinking of this as competitiveness, and having a much more time thinking of this as, I'm not going to get into a game where I don't know what the rules are or how well I'm going to do.
Well, the rules are clear. The question is how well you're going to do.
Intelligence.
Well,
like, why would I be in a tournament where I have no idea how I'm going to do?
So if you think that your IQ is going to be related to how well you do in this task,
but other than self-efficacy, actually, right? Which is why that's the person I brought up.
So if you think your IQ is going to be related to how well you do in this task, then that's not accounting for the gender difference, right? Because we have a measure of performance. Now we don't have a measure of IQ. So in the paper with Marcus, we actually have a subgroup of people. So we have like a kind of a very short IQ test,
right.
And then we also have we have a subgroup of people who run this gender competition stuff, and IQ is not accounting for the gender gap.
Well, and so in fact, actually, I meant intelligence in the more not the Stanford Binet sense.
So the question is, okay, one question is to think about what does it mean to be, what are competitive attitudes?
Right.
Okay. So on the one hand, I thought it's kind of obvious, but you may not.
Yeah, that's why I said, like, maybe I'm misunderstanding what you mean by competitiveness. Because
another way to think of it is that I think of something like ambition. You know, I also think it's obvious what ambition is, but I have a very hard time measuring ambition. The question is, I think actually ambition and competitiveness are going to be somewhat very correlated, and both of those are concepts. You know, it's a bit wishy-washy. I mean, I have a good definition of this concept, but you know, which is why, you know, as an experimental economist, I measure things, and then I want to show you that this is going to be important outside of the lab. So this is going to be, you know, so I'm going to move on to this because I want to make sure I tell you about this. Okay, that this actually matters for an economic decision we care about.
Okay.
Now, what it exactly measures, I agree. So that might be hard to think about, but I think, you know, something like ambition, which, you know, on the one hand, I think we all have a good view about what ambition is. But, you know, how are you going to define ambition? How are you going to measure it? That's going to be very difficult. And the question is, this might just be a measure of ambition. That would be fine for me as well. I don't know how to say it. I'm measuring it, this is competition, so I'm going to call it competitiveness.
Right.
But
we know exactly what she's measuring. It's precisely defined by the measurements,
well, that's correct, but
which she calls it.
Right, and words don't actually just mean things.
Oh, there's one thing which you have not taken into account. It could be that men actually are trained by evolution. It's good for the population for the man to be in a race where he's actually killed. So it's really bad for, and it's really, so I enter this competition not because I win.
It could be genetics. You know, to some extent, there's a huge debate on thinking about, is it genetics or is it the environment? And I think it's an interesting question. It's probably going to be a combination. So I think one question at some point could be, how can we change this? First, I want to show you it matters. We're going to do that.
Yes.
And then the question is, how can we change?
She'll show us it matters.
Okay. So why should we care about this gender difference in competitiveness? And as in economics, especially in behavioral economics, there's quite some new drive to think about external validity. And the way people often think of external validity is to say, I'm going to replicate this lab experiment with real people, as opposed to students. And often they take like some weird group of people who are like, you know, whatever, collectors of funky things, or, you know, inhabitants of funny countries. So I don't care about this kind of, you know, I have a better idea about how students should behave than a weird group of people I don't know anything about. And to some extent, what we care about is not finding it with a group of people outside of the lab, but we care about showing that what I measure, you know, this trait that I measured, is going to help me understand an economic decision I care about. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is what we're going to do.
Right.
Okay. So the question is, can this non-cognitive skill, called it competitiveness, account for example, why women don't choose math fields? Okay. So in order to do that, I have two different quarters, Thomas Buser and Hessel Oosterbeek. We ran an experiment with Dutch secondary school children. The advantage of running this in the Netherlands is that while they pre-select 20% of the most gifted students, however they do this, to go to this pre-university track, once these students are in this pre-university track, for the last 6 years of school, before they start college, they have, at the end of the third year, a choice to make about the track they want to have in the last 3 years of school. Okay? There are 4 tracks. One is a nature and technology track, a nature and health track, economics and society track, and a society and culture track. This is the order of how much math they're going to have. This is also the order of how prestigious it is, where the best kids go, where the kids with the highest GPA go.
Is that how prestigious measured? By your entering GPA?
So it turns out when you ask people what is the most prestigious, what is the ordering in terms of prestigious, That's the order they're going to
give.
give.
People, that's a good measure of prestige.
It happens to be also correlated with the GPA, which kind of, that makes it more plausible that it's a good measure of prestige.
No, but prestige is precisely people's opinion of it. So.
That's right. Mm-hmm. What you're going to choose for your last 3 years of high school is also correlated with what you're going to study afterwards. It's correlated with your chance of actually going to university. And boys in the Netherlands are much more likely to choose the nature and technology. This is a very math-heavy track. And girls are much more likely to choose the culture and society track. Okay, this loser track. This is actually such a big problem that they thought of abandoning this track. Okay, because it attracts all these women, and then
and then it's being
very hard to study science afterwards. Yeah. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to take 4 schools in and around Amsterdam. We're going to get in that school every single child who is in 9th grade, which means before they have to make that choice about what they're going to do for the last 3 years. We have in total 400 students. There are some students who come late, so we don't have the data of everybody. So we have 360 kids for which we have all the data. We're going to run experiments with them in March, April, and May, these gender competition experiments. And then at the end of June, we're going to get from the school the grades of those kids. And we're going to get their choices for the last 3 years of high school.
Next year?
That they're going to start next year. So now they just started. This is new choice. They just finished their first year, I guess. Okay.
Are you going to use the same metric, the adding numbers?
We're going to use the same thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically do this gender competition experiment like I just showed you. We also asked them about the beliefs. We're going to do the risk assessment question a little bit different. We basically directly ask them to choose one of 5 options. Either get €2 for sure, it's in Europe, so we pay them in euros, or pick a gamble between 50-50 chance of €3 or €1.50, or €4 and 1, or 5 and nothing. Then we ask them, because math is the thing that varies the most, we ask them about how good they think they are in math.
So you can just clarify on this thing, when you say 50-50 gamble, you're participating in a tournament with 2 people?
No, sorry. This is first we do this tournament question thing.
This is something.
And then we say, on top of that, we say the following. You have a choice. You can either get €2 for sure, or you can pick one of those gambles.
So this really tests risk
It's a direct risk question.
Yeah.
Now the reason, let me not say why we didn't
The average is not 2, right?
No, it increases. Okay. So in expectation, if you're completely risk neutral, you should pick the last one. We also asked them, how good do you think you are in math? And we also asked them, because one problem is I'm going to have the math grade. But the math grade in 9th grade is not going to be a perfect predictor of how good you are in math. Because in order to get a good grade, it might be helpful to be good in math. But it might also be helpful to just be very conscientious and not make kind of stupid mistakes. So we also asked them, how difficult is it for you to pass the math class?
That's very relevant. I taught college math to thousands of students. And I had girls all the time who were in the top 1% of my class. I would tell them they were good at math, and they would say, no, I'm not, I'm lucky, or no, I'm not, I worked hard. I mean, it was just, and very often when guys did badly on exams, they would tell me why they were unlucky. I mean, it was just, it was way, since I taught thousands of students, there are actually, had I compiled it, it would have been statistically significant.
So I actually have data on math and science self-efficacy of engineering students who start college and then graduate 4 years later in engineering. And we see the same thing.
Right, and I mean, I would have women who were like the best out of 300 students, and I would say, have you thought of going on in math? And they'd say, no, I'm not good at math.
Which is why, this is why.
Right, so I agree with you, it's very important to ask those 2 questions separately.
Exactly. But because we worry that, we don't want to measure with our experimental variable this question. Okay? Right. So we're going to ask it separately, and we're going to control for that, and see whether on top of that we're going to be able to explain.
And asking a self-efficacy question is the right way. Yeah.
Then we ask them, what profile do you plan to pick? Just because there's some people for whom we don't get the data, but it turns out this is almost perfect correlation with what they actually pick. And then we ask them this prestigious question. What are the best students picking? Okay. And then remember, we get this data from the school about their grades and what they actually pick.
Do you ask them which profile do the best students in math pick? Or do you
no, the best students.
But up there you ask them are they the best, but are they best in math?
Yeah,
because the test is a math test.
So why don't
it's an
you ask
arithmetic
them
test.
also what rank do you think you have overall? Because that would correlate more.
Well, let's see.
No, because see, the funny thing is, this actually happens to be the case in France, where you have a choice like this. It's also true that how prestigious a profile is and how much math it has is very correlated. Then a slide which I don't have is there is only one subject that is taught everywhere at different levels, and that's math. They all have Dutch, but exactly the same level. They all have some history, exactly the same level. The only subject that is taught in every single profile, but at different levels, is actually math.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we focus on this math question. The other thing is, presumably, you know a little bit about how good you are compared to your other kids in your class. So, but anyway, we just asked this much question. You know, the drawback of running stuff outside of the lab is that it has to fit in a class. We get one class with them. You know, class like 45 minutes, so it's a limited number of questions we could ask. So this is what we asked them. Okay? So when you look at the grades, the GPA of girls is, if anything, a little bit higher than of boys, but you know, it's significantly higher, but you know, the difference is not that big. Boys are a little bit better than girls in math, but this difference is not significant. So grades out of 10, with 10 being the best grade. Girls think that math is much more difficult, and they think that they have a harder time of passing the math class. When we look at the profiles that are chosen by the children in our sample, we find that boys are much more likely to choose the NT track, the math track. We find that girls are much more likely to choose this culture and society track, even though, remember, their grades were basically the same, and even their math grades were basically the same.
But it's non-monotone.
Yeah, I mean, the second track is pretty
That's right, perfect. So when you look at just the sciences together, compared to the non-sciences, it's almost equal. Okay? It turns out a lot of people who go to the NH track, a lot of them become nurses. So some of them become doctors too, but many of them become nurses. But so we're going to think about prestigiousness. We're also going to have, I definitely don't have this in the talk, but in the paper in the appendix, we compare these two to these two in terms of prestigiousness. Okay, the results are actually still going to be there more or less. This is something that is true in our sample. When you look at all of the Netherlands, this is not the case. There might be two reasons. One is the Netherlands data that I showed you. It's a little bit older, but these are kids that are going to finish 4 years from now. And the other one is that these are schools in and around Amsterdam. Okay, so a lot of these gender differences are often bigger when you go away from the capital.
And they really do rate economics and society as lower than nature and health in terms of prestige?
Yeah. They all agree in terms of prestige.
And it's still, there's this, I mean, the girls are almost tied and the boys are overwhelmingly picking.
So when we, so the regression I'm going to show you is I'm going to pick the order of prestigiousness that the average person picked. And it's, I mean, it's literally like, 80% of them agree that it's the first, 80% agree it's the second.
Dr. Nito, do you have the gender breakdown for each of the 4 profiles?
Was thinking of prestigiousness or?
No, in terms of who's actually in those profiles, what percentage?
This is what they choose. Here it is.
That's what. So are the numbers of the program? Those don't add up to. Let's try to forget.
This ends up.
I looked at like
this is the number of kids,
class.
and
Yeah.
this adds up to 100. It's not because of zero.
So in the nature technology profile, what percentage are male and what percentage are female?
It's very close to
It's
that.
probably indicative.
Yeah,
of the
I mean,
Yeah, because
this
it's
is basically, we have the
177,
same sample of
185.
So it's going to be roughly.
2 to 1 is pretty good, actually.
Yes. So remember the two things that change. One is these are kids that finished in 3 years, so the data I have are from kids that finished 3 years ago. So there are some changes. But the other thing is that these are these are schools in and around Amsterdam. These are not schools, in the countryside. So these differences are often bigger.
And do you think it's about prestige or is about like the career choice that you then go on? Because it seemed like nature and technology went on to become engineers.
That's right. So it could be, what can drive these differences in choices? So it could be that it's driven by pure preferences. Okay. So then you would imagine that my measure of competitiveness should have no impact, which is fine. I mean, that's what I want to find out. Okay. Can it help me understand these differences? So let me show you, I wanted to say one more thing. What we also do in a paper, but not in the talk, is we can ask for every kid, we ask for every child, what's the order of procedures? We can take their own order and rerun these regressions, and the results are still the same. But for what I'm going to show you, we're going to pick that order of procedures and fix it. Okay. So here is an ordered Probit regression. So this says, how much more likely am I to pick the most prestigious profile, or here's the highest number, is the least prestigious profile, as a function of my math grades, my GPA, my relative math grade in the class, or how difficult I think math is. And what you find is that women are significantly more likely to pick less prestigious profiles. Okay, so where high numbers are bad, less prestigious. And because it's an ordered Probit regression, to interpret these numbers, I'm going to show you how much of the gap between picking the most and the least prestigious profile is bridged just by being female. Okay,
just by
being female.
And then do you correlate them with the competitor? Because this would distinguish, this would answer his question about, are the women picking that just because they like being doctors and nurses, or are they picking it because in spite of their good grades, they don't think that they could be that, and you're going to correlate it with the competitiveness in your test.
So here I'm not controlling yet for any of my experimental variables. Okay, so here I'm showing you for this sample of kids, what can account for these choices, and are there gender differences once you account for grades, and given that the grades are basically the same.
Right.
Now we showed that the beliefs are different about how good they are in math. Okay? But even when you account for that, being female bridges 15% of this gap between choosing the best and the worst one.
But the program's like, so it's also the difference between I want to go into nature technology, which is 80% male, or whatever, 70% male, versus I want to go into nature and health, which is 70% female. So there's it seems that there's like,
there are many reasons why this might happen.
Right, but she's going to see whether it correlates with this thing that she calls competitiveness, and this will distinguish it.
So when we look at our sample of children, these 400 children, we find basically what I showed you before. Boys are more likely to pick the tournament. 26 percentage points more likely to pick the tournament. About a third of it is driven by gender differences in beliefs, and like a small fraction by gender differences in risk aversion. Okay, so in this competitiveness study, they look a lot like the longer study I just showed you. So now the question is, once I control for how competitive they are, is that going to help me understand the choices they make? Okay? So if it's just driven by preferences, this should have zero impact, which would be fine. That's exactly what I want to find out. So one way to look at this is I can break down what kids I look at. So I can look at boys that are very competitive, that enter the tournament, and I can look at girls that did not enter the tournament. I can just look at this subgroup of people and I can ask, are they making different choices? Okay, so if you look at competitive boys and non-competitive girls, there's a huge gender difference in the choice they make. If you look on the other hand at non-competitive boys and competitive girls, there's basically no gender differences in their choices. Okay? So here we don't control for grades, this is just taking different samples, but this already suggests that how competitive people are is going to have an impact on what they choose. Okay. To give you some time for question afterwards, let me show you another figure on thinking about that competitiveness may be important. What I show you here is the residual of, so I'm going to run the following regression. I'm going to regress my choice of entering the tournament on my tournament performance, how good I was in the tournament, how good I was in the piece rate, what's my chance of winning, and plus some residual. I'm going to plot here is this residual. So what this plots is the average competitiveness of people who choose a specific profile. So if I look at, for example, women or girls, women who choose the nature and technology track, this is the math-heavy track, are much more competitive than girls who choose the culture and society track. And for boys, this difference is even more pronounced. The most competitive boys, you're going to find them among the people who choose nature and technology. And the boys who choose culture and society, in a sense, they almost look like girls in terms of their competitiveness. Okay?
And for girls, all the numbers are negative.
All the numbers are negative.
Because relative to boys, they're negative.
They're negative, but still the most competitive girls go to nature and technology. Okay?
This could also just be, like, if it's a nonlinear relationship, if, like, there's just some threshold where sort of if you're... I'm just thinking this linear regression, like, people don't, you know, if you have some thresholding function going on, then you would get this same plot.
Would you?
Yeah, if you have, you can put some monotone function if you want.
So there are two ways. So in the what I could have showed you is the fraction of people who enter the tournament. But to some extent, you care about, you know, the people who are very good should enter the tournament. So what I want to show you here is that how much more do you enter the tournament compared to me when we have the same performance? And is that residual that I'm going to plot here?
So the admission to these different tracks that they're choosing, was it cut off at some numbers? Was it a competition or?
No, they can choose the track they choose. So basically, it's up to them what they choose, but that's not exactly true because, so I went to the French school system, so I know exactly how it works there. Is that if you are really bad in math and in sciences, while you choose in the French system for graduating, they're going to take an average of all your grades because math is so heavily graded in the, you know, has such a big weight in the math track. If you are very bad in math, they are not going to allow you to do the math track. But otherwise, you can choose whatever you want. Okay, so there are going to be some limitations on what you can do. So if you're too bad, it's like, you know, some people have to repeat the class.
It's an individual decision.
It's an individual decision. Now you talk to your friends, so you know who knows who makes that decision. Your parents, you know, so there might be lots of things that drive it. So I actually don't know that. I can just observe the decisions.
So I want to come back something which he brought up, which is a feeling that maybe boys feel they should enter competition, irrespective of the chance whether they should win. I mean, when I was a little boy, my father said I shouldn't wear a hat if it's raining, and when I asked why, I said, because you're a boy, you should sort of run with your head free in the rain. And so I could quite well imagine that boys are told you should enter a competition, it doesn't matter whether you win.
And it happens to be, these are the same boys that enter the math track. Okay? So it turns out that whatever your father told you, I could imagine, maybe it's your mother, I don't know, but that you kind of internalize this and it manifests itself in both of those decisions. That's what this shows, right? Is that not only did he tell you to enter the tournament, he also told you to enter NT. That might be fine, because in a sense it almost becomes a trade of you, which is, I guess, what I want to show you.
What happens if you take this residual into the regression?
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is, here I actually don't put the residual in the regression, I actually put your choice plus the performance, but you can also put the residual in the regression, it's exactly the same. Okay. So here what I'm going to show you is an autopoid regression of the choice that you make as a function of your performance in the experiment, and whether you're male or female, and then I'm going to add whether you enter the tournament or not. Okay. So this we have seen before, almost. Being female bridges 19% of the gap between choosing the best and the worst profile. Once I add the tournament decision, this gap shrinks to 15%. Okay, so I have a shrinking of 23% of the gender gap by just adding this one variable, which is whether you enter the tournament or not. Okay, so if I know whether you enter the tournament or not, I'm going to be reducing the gender gap in choices by 23%. Okay, once I know this additional information about you. This survives if you're going to put information on grade. Okay, I reduce the gender gap by 13%. It also survives if I put information about how good you think you are in math. If I add information on how good you think you are in math only, compared to just the grades, the gender gap is going to actually decrease. But once I add this competition, the gender gap decreases even more, and I explain 70% of the original gap. I get 17.8% reduction of the original gender gap once I account for their decision to enter the tournament or not. Okay. So competitiveness is this non-cognitive skill that significantly correlates with choices of study profiles after controlling for grades and controlling for your feeling on mathematical prowess or mathematical ability. Basically controlling for this competitiveness or this choice of entering the tournament reduces the gender gap in profile choice by about 18%.
So this understates the role of competitiveness, because your preferences over becoming a nurse or a doctor may also be determined by your competitiveness.
Yeah.
Sure. That's right. The thing is that it's basically on top of your preferences. So the competitiveness may also influence your choice, whether you want to actually become a nurse or not. That's right. But this is in addition to that. I have an additional measure of competitiveness. So it's even more important than just influencing your preferences. It kind of directly can explain your choices or correlates with your choices. So remember here we just look at the choice of entering the tournament. We saw that beliefs are very important. and risk aversion was somewhat important. So we can also add beliefs and risk aversion into this regression. Let me just do this directly. When I control for beliefs as well, adding competitiveness still reduces the gender gap by 15%. When I have just risk attitude, competitiveness accounts for 17% reduction. And when I add both beliefs and risk attitudes, once I add whether they enter the tournament or not, I still get a reduction of 14% of the gender gap in choices. Okay? We had 18% before. So a big fraction of this impact of entering the tournament or not comes from competitiveness, does not come from beliefs or from risk aversion. So what we showed is that this competitiveness measure seems to be an important factor in educational choices. And this is a different way of bridging the gap between lab experiments and the field, is we're going to use a lab measure to predict outcomes outside of the lab. So what did I show you? I showed you that this is literature on gender difference in competitiveness. We found gender difference in performance in my original paper. We found gender difference in choices of compensation schemes. There's a huge literature that shows that these results are kind of robust. It's very easy to replicate this. We're not the only ones who find this. It's somewhat driven by, you can change it if you add, if you look at more female-oriented tasks. Now the reason we care about male-oriented tasks is that it happens to be that, math
where the money is.
areas, they're the most prestigious one, and it happens to be male tasks. So, that's why we look at male tasks. And then we show that this gender difference in competitiveness can be important in the field and can help us account for choices people make outside of the lab. Okay, so when we think about open questions or things, nice we want to do next, or other people hopefully can do next, is to try to understand a little bit more what does this competitiveness measure exactly. Okay? So I think it's also a measure of ambition, and the question is how much of ambition or confidence or social background or hormones. So there's some literature that this depends on hormones. For women, there seems to be also a change on when you are in your cycle. Different papers find different hormones to be important, so there's still a lot of work to be done. Another question is, can we teach women to be competitive? And is that going to be having an impact on your choices outside of the lab? I don't know. We also want to potentially expand the domain. There might be other areas where there might be large gender differences, beyond just risk aversion and altruism, which is what people look at the most, like choosing hard or easy tasks. Okay, here we looked at tournament versus piece rate, but so I have a paper that looks at hard and easy tasks, and you basically get the same results. And when you think of these choices in education, it might be also related to hard and easy tasks. Negotiations, there's a lot of behavioral psychology literature looking at gender differences in negotiations. It might be that this is something that also might be important.
So too much competitiveness may be harmful, but clearly, the right women are known to not negotiate well for salaries and stuff, and they're known to not. So certainly some measure of competitiveness is necessary, I would think, right, or not?
I agree. Now the problem is, so a lot of these studies on negotiations, so on the one hand they're very nice. On the other hand, it's often very hard to know your outside option. So here is a typical study. We're going to look at MBAs, say from Carnegie Mellon, and we're going to check how, what is the salary they get afterwards. Maybe ask them, did you negotiate or not? So it turns out women negotiate less. Many women have a husband who is local. So, then it's much harder for them to get jobs outside of Pittsburgh. So the problem is at some point you're going to have to control for things that can account for whether you can negotiate or not.
And those studies have been done too.
Yeah.
There definitely have been studies looking at women negotiating in lab type situations like you described.
Right. So in lab situations, so the problem is, so a lot of the lab situation studies are either just they're kind of more looking at vignettes where you say would you negotiate or not, or you do kind of game theoretic experiments, and then it's actually much less clear what you find. So I think this is something finding. I think there's room to do more. I'm not going to say these are bad studies.
Room to do more, right? Doing real experiments in the real world is hard. Doing real experiments, doing experiments in the lab is limited. There's always room to do more.
So what did you say is a negotiation like Geldheim experiments?
Say again?
What kind of experiments was it?
You can do like ultimatum game stuff, you know.
Yeah.
So
Those
that's the
are
problem.
experiments
It's very
which are
there are lots of things that can happen. So one thing we actually want to look at is negotiation on buying or selling a house. So here the orthodoxy is clear, it's the value of the house. Okay, so you don't have to worry about potentially, whether you have a spouse or not, which you can observe. And in Denmark, the nice thing in Denmark is that, like some of these northern countries, you basically know everybody about every Danish citizen, everything. So we can actually check whether single women pay more for houses and sell them for less compared to single men. So I think it's just a lot of more things to be done, I guess, is really what I want to say. And I really want to push, for those of you who are interested in these things, this one way to think of external validity is to combine some of these behavioral measures that we have from the lab and combine these with measures outside of the lab. Okay? And ideally, the way we do it here is that we measure the behavioral variable before they make these choices outside of the lab. Okay, so there are some papers that look at those in combination, which is also nice, but then you worry about what is driving them. That's it.
So I'm trying to think about policy implications, right? So like usually when we try to understand why it is that we don't see as many women as men choosing science-intensive careers or curricula, like one of the sort of like both sides of the debate is like, is this because of the differences in preferences that are sort of somehow intrinsic, or is it because of like socialization where we're telling women you shouldn't choose these careers, and these have different implications for like whether we should, how much we should be trying to encourage women. So here, like, it seems like this measure of competitiveness also is sort of there are both nature and nurture factors in here. So can we use this to think about sort of what how much we want to intervene or how?
So one thing this tells me at least is that this suggests that the choices of how much math you have are not just driven by how much you like math. Okay? Otherwise I wouldn't have found this. Okay? So this already suggests that it's not just preferences about how much you like math, which in itself could be preferences that are driven by all kinds of stuff that happens, in kindergarten or whatever we say, girls should do math a lot. Now, what I do not know is if I can affect your competitiveness, maybe through sports or single-sex classes or whatever, is that going to affect your choices? So that's a link I haven't done. The other link, which I actually don't know, is that when you go back, suppose you're a woman, okay, you chose NT. Suddenly, you're going to find yourself surrounded. So in 3 years, I can tell you whether being competitive is going to help me not just understand the choices, but also potentially of how well they do 3 years later in that class, okay, which is something I don't know. So that's definitely something I would want to know before I make a lot of policy questions. But so it turns out from the experimental literature at least, if you look at this competitiveness, that girls not only are often, or women are more competitive in more female tasks, but they're also more competitive competing against other women.
Yes.
Okay, so that's definitely something that we have seen. So that might be something that you could explore more. But I think there's a lot more we want to know before we're going to go there.
So one thing that you could try to do, obviously, a longitudinal study, following people for a long time would help with this nature versus nurture. But also, it's pretty well established that at least in this country, women shift in how much they like math between the ages of 12 and 14. Until age 12, there doesn't seem to be a large gender gap in preferences, and after age 14 there does, which is why people try to have all these all of the interventions in junior high school. So I'm wondering if you could do some of the same tests on 10-year-olds and 16-year-olds and see if there's a difference, and surmise that some of that difference is environmental and
So people have done,
Nurture.
at least for gender difference in competitiveness, people looked at 3-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 11-year-olds in Austria, and you find these gender differences very early. Now, unfortunately, this cannot really tell us whether it's nature or nurture, because I have no idea when nurture kicks in.
Yeah, oh no, nurture kicks in, but I'm saying that this strong, I mean, when you talk to 10-year-old girls, a lot of them are still thinking math is really great, and when you talk to 15-year-old girls, they're not. So at least with regards to math, somehow some change is happening in there.
So it'd be interesting to see that correlate with competitiveness.
Exactly.
Right? Like,
Right.
can we disambiguate essentially the cultural pieces of math from the competitive,
Right.
you're still competitive, you just don't
Yes,
learn math.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, they
And
don't
how do
study
we-
the same math.
What?
They don't study the same math, the 10-year-olds and the 15-year-olds.
So
Oh
this is,
yes,
you know,
it could be geometry. It could be that girls inherently hate geometry, but
it's also another thing here is that here what we do is that the most prestigious happens to be the most math intensive. I actually don't know whether it's driven by prestigiousness or by math intensity.
well, you could study that by looking at the people in the NH track and seeing who chooses to become doctors and nurses, and that would be a measure of. I mean, because those are similar fields. They're both kind of taking care of people, and they're both within the same track, and yet there's some difference in the ambition, presumably.
So what we can do is we can run this regression on your order of how you said this, what is the most prestigious. Okay, and then the results are basically the same. So it doesn't seem to be, but it just happens to be in most societies that math intensity and prestigiousness is very correlated. In other countries where you have a choice, it's exactly the same.
So one question I have here, which is, when you study competitiveness, you study competitive about mass.
Yeah.
Which is sort of, so what if we studied competitive about
Like
something?
baking pies.
No, I don't want it gender specific, but I don't want it to be mass, because the mass is sort of the same thing we're addressing. I want to study pure competitiveness. for
Racing,
people
sprinting, or
who
something.
hate mass, playing soccer or whatever.
So my first
or
paper,
playing the violin, sort of, because I want to really get at the competitiveness.
so, okay, so that, it turns out, so if I'm gonna do like a verbal task, sometimes I still find gender differences, sometimes not. I do not know whether the competitiveness in the verbal task would be equally important for these choices. I don't know that. The reason we pick math, so first, the first time, obviously the first time somebody said, why did you pick math? It's like, sure, adding up numbers is math. Literally, this is, I mean,
This is people's
it's
stereotype
so
of math.
far away from math.
This is exactly people's stereotype of math.
No, this is 10th grade math.
So it turns out that gender
Yeah,
differences
so
in
10th
math
grade
are not present for task analysis in general. The gender differences in math in school appear much, much later and are much more often about really difficult math than about easy math. Now the problem is people may not know that. We did another task where we did mazes, and then people said, oh, mazes, hunting, it's like, okay, sure. So, I don't know.
Why don't you play the violin or sing? Or
how do you measure how good you are in singing? So the problem is I need something where I can measure your performance precisely without you worrying that I'm going to judge you differently because you're a man or woman.
How fast can you type?
A certain text. Perfect. So the problem is it turns out that I would have to bring computers. This I can do with pencil and paper, so it's much easier. I don't know how to type either. I don't know how to type. So I didn't think of typing. But so I agree. So the question is, what is a good measure of this competitiveness? But I guess what I can tell you is that this measure happens to be very correlated with these choices. So this seems to measure something. It's not just, so it could be that how competitive you are is somewhat fluid, but this seems to be definitely picking up an important trait that you have, because it helps you predict these choices that you make outside. So that's kind of my defense.
So maybe we can do one or two more questions.
Okay.
You can fight for the question. We have food there.
Yes, and also Mural is here until Friday.
So given that I know David and Jacob, I'm going to pick the people I don't know. So how about you? You never ask a question.
Have there been any cross-cultural studies or studies in Asia where a lot more women do go into math, at least in high school level it is. But then, over the career, there are a lot of you who go to the top. So have there been studies seeing how there is competitiveness?
So we have not done it in Korea. People have done it in China with So they also find some gender differences in competitiveness. In most places, people do replicate the gender difference in competitiveness. There's one study where they look at a matriarchal society where they find no gender differences in competitiveness.
It's interesting. Which society is that?
So these are the in India. I forgot.
Oh.
Kerala?
No, a different one.
I see. But in India, some matriarchal society. Very cool.
So another effect people discuss in motivation is learning is people's willingness to fail. Like part of learning to get good at something, right? You have to work hard at it, and you know, people when they fail at something, they never want to do it again. And a very big effect when people discuss this is, and like math has this very correct or not correct aspect to it. Like you write an essay, someone can give you a concrete math. It's like if you can't figure it out, you basically not figured it out. And now the question is, how, you know, do you come back to it and other. And you know, at least when I read about education, right, this is very hard to get people, and it's crippling. Like some people who succeed a lot, they don't want to fail, and they just they no longer can succeed anymore. So, has this been studied in this context?
So not in this context. In psychology, there's it's kind of a lot of literature on this.
Right, this seems equally important for.
So the problem is. The question is how. You know, for me, the question is I want to try to measure this. With some objective outcome. So this is what I did here with the competitiveness. Now, I think to some extent, you know, like ambition or even this willingness to expose yourself to potential failure. You know, this might be
you did
all
pick
part
that
of this.
up a little bit with your risk aversion, with your data.
Even the choice of entering the
This is not an external. This is the fact that even internally, like if you believe you cannot do, and you kind of get immediate feedback. The question is, do the next time you try this again, you say, oh, I'm not good at X, and I don't do it again. Right. Other differences, or cultural, or gender differences.
And maybe this is part of competitiveness, which I think it is. Now, I don't know
but it's a very different way of viewing it. It's more like the flip side of competitive, right?
That's why I don't have a good definition of what these measures exactly. So this is part of what I said is that definitely want to understand this more. You know, what goes into this measure and what is it correlated with? And I think to some extent it is, I don't think I said, you know, willingness to fail, but I think, you know, exposing yourself. So when I think of this hard versus easy task, that's exactly there what you have. So there, I have a choice between, so in this experiment, you can choose between an easy task and a hard task. And the way I construe the task, it's literally, it's not math versus literature. The hard task is harder for everybody and easier for everybody.
Right, but this is studied pretty actively, like in education. And somehow correcting for things like how good you are is irrelevant for this, because in a sense, this is how much effort you put into something, rather than, you could be very good, but, you know, like if I try something new, I might not be good at it, but what matters is how willing I'm to fail when I start. That's right.
So even thinking about how much effort you want to put, I mean, yeah, that's you know, another way to think of that, suppose I allow you to try it out before. So how much are you going to work in order to become very good? Right. So I think these are also, I think a lot of these are important traits. And I think a lot of that, you know, I think in the behavioral economics literature, we have focused a bit too much on things that we, you know, altruism and risk aversion, you know, it's very interesting, but, you know, boy, you know, it would be nice to move on a little bit and think of some of these other traits, you know, like confidence, and even confidence. It's actually shocking how little work in economics there is on confidence. And, you know, I think, like Marcus and I, we have, and Paul, who is also visiting here, and Tanya Rosenblatt, you know, we have one of the first papers where we really try to measure exactly, you know, precisely how people form their beliefs and update their beliefs. I think there's a lot of things we don't understand yet. And I definitely hope that, you know, we're going to move to that.
Yeah, something is very interesting because you could think of, like, you know, explaining why in some tasks, you know, self-deception is easier in some tasks than other tasks. You know, maybe in tasks particularly.
But it's very clear in education.
Yeah, it's hard when you're doing math to have a whole.
This is sports too, right? Part of that, you know, I think good educational things is, you know, you want to teach kids not that. Oh, you're good at X. You want to say like, oh, you failed, but that's okay, right? It's important to try things you're going to fail.
Well, don't call it failure.
And that's a huge, you know, Carol Dweck has a big literature on saying, you know, you don't want to tell people, you don't want to tell kids that they are smart. You want to tell them, oh, you worked hard. You actually
that's right.
You
and
can actually
kind
do
of
it.
Strong evidence suggesting this is
There's also, for me it's clear that competitiveness and math, is kind of a good correlation. But then people say, oh, but literature is so much more competitive because you look at all these PhDs, you look at how many jobs there are. It's like, sure, but on the other hand, math has this somewhat much more absolute measure. I mean, I can solve it and the other person can't. Whereas it's very, so I think of math as being more competitive, but I can see that other people may have a different view. And I think this is exactly why we want to have this view that math is more competitive, because you have this ordering of people. It's, it turns out that when you're on tenure committees, in math, people have a much better view on how good you are compared to other people, whereas in literature, that's much more.
Yeah, but those are all still heavily influenced by social constructs.
Sure, exactly.
So. And in fact, again, there's data looking at, for example, postdocs. I think it was in Denmark, where female postdocs basically they did the equivalent of a FOIA request to see who was getting fellowships and who wasn't. And they basically did like a regression of the data showing that women had to be far more productive than their male counterparts to get the same fellowship. There is a rich literature in psychology, and there's a rich literature around education on many of these things that are sort of, which is of course what I've been drawing on for the last hour, that are sort of complementary to this, and will probably be a really good place to sort of start digging.
Sure. No, I mean, discrimination. Here, the thing is that I basically got rid of discrimination. Discrimination might still be important, and this is part of it. So it might be that I don't even apply it.
No, if the big difference between them was their confidence. You have not gotten rid of discrimination, right? You've externalized it. But self-efficacy, it's not, discrimination is the wrong word for it, right?
Right, so I have got rid of discrimination.
It shows that something else might have been acceptable.
That's right, but it's not clear that that's been externalized.
We should thank Muriel and continue the discussion with some